This this workshop or this conference is all about economics, and you must be wondering what's a computer science scientist doing with all economists. And I'll tell you why I'm the perfect person to be here. So, the Chat GPT moment hit all of us in November 22. I had been working on language models for some time before that, and soon the dean of engineering got inundated with AI for this, AI for that. So AI, how do we use AI in research? How do we use AI in teaching? How do we use AI for internal Columbia processes? How do we get compute for AI? And it was just too much for him to handle. So he created this new position of dean for computing and AI, and he asked me to take over. So AI has certainly transformed this Indian's job. So that's why I'm here. But I mean, this is a really an important topic. Anand was talking about it during his talk. So it's on top of the mind of, let's say, the PMO or everyone in India. So I have much more qualified people who are going to talk about it. I'll just moderate the session. So the first speaker is Marina Tavares. She is a senior economist at the IMF working on climate change. She got her PhD from University of Minnesota, and before working on climate change, she was working on the connections between macroeconomics and inequality. So we'll start with Marina.
Hi, everybody. Sorry, my voice is not the best, but I'm sure that my enthusiasm is going to be enough to make this presentation wonderful. So, as you mentioned, so today I'm going to be talking about AI in the future of work. And this was actually the first work published by the IMF in this topic. It was issued by a managing director during Davos, and was one work done by the research department, and quite important as well internally, because it shows that this topic, it's, as we say in the IMF, macro critical, because it's matter for jobs, it's matter for growth, and it matters for us. So I think we are all convinced that this new technology is going to change the world globally. And the way why we decide to jump into this project in the beginning of last year is because we noticed that most of the work discussing the impact of AI was focused on advanced economies in the US, in the UK. However, we want to speak for our entire membership. We had many member countries that want to fully understand what would be the impact for AI for there. Though they were less developed countries, they were still low-income countries. They want to fully be able to grasp what they should expect to these technologies, where the risks were, and where they could benefit or even leapfrog other steps of development. So us at the fund, we thought that was part of our co-work was too important for us to understand the implications of AI. So what I'm going to talk here is a little bit, I'm going to go over different aspects. First, I'm going to talk a little bit the implications of AI across different jobs in advanced economies and emerging market development economies, discuss when AI could displace workers or when they could what we call complement work or augment work, when this technology is going to make works more productive and maybe even increase the wage of these workers. Then I will discuss briefly that although there are potential benefits for AI, what could be the implications for AI in terms of income inequality? And I'm going to talk as well about the potential impact to capital income, because it's also an important source for wealth inequality. And last, I'm going to just briefly mention how we see countries prepared to adopt these technologies, where are their weakness, where are their strengths, and where policymakers should be putting more effort to really closing this gap. So let me briefly talk a little bit about the methodology that we developed in this paper. So first is that we use a task-based framework that was developed by Acemoglu Restrepo. Acemoglu just won, together with his co-authors, the Nobel Prize. And on this task-based framework, what we see occupation is a combination of tasks. So for example, if you're a teacher, some of their tasks is communication to students, prepare your class, organize the syllabus. So your job is really this big combination of these tasks. And what economists have done, and particularly we're going to here use the work of Felton, is to look between the overlap of these tasks with the capabilities that AI has to do these tasks. So this is going to be giving you a measure of exposure. If a lot of your tasks, for example, AI is already to perform, uh, then we say that AI has your occupation, your job is high exposed to AI. Now, when this methodology was developed before ChatGPT, but one thing that we thought that was weak about it is that it didn't give you any insight about whether uh, whether although you have exposed to AI, whether your job would more likely to benefit from AI or would be like more likely to be hurt. To do that, we decided to look at occupations a little bit more broad and to look at using ONET. ONET is a dictionary of occupation that was first developed in North Carolina to help students at high school to find what would be their career for them. But lately, it's become the national use and international use. But basically, ONET has other aspects of a job besides the task, but also look at the work contents and the skills. So those are, for example, does your job require communication, face-to-face interaction? Does it require public speaking? Are you responsible for the outcome of others? For example, are you a pilot? What happens if you make a mistake? What are the consequences of that? Physical conditions. Where did these jobs made? Is a job that is done mostly inside or outside? Criticality. What is the consequences of errors as well of these decisions? Routine. Routine is essentially whether the job is repetitive. And usually routine jobs are jobs that are more exposed to automation. And skills is that look at the level of education. So when we combine these two aspects, which is exposure, so how many of the tasks that you do AI can perform, and you do the complementarity, we can measure occupations between here in the x-axis for the exposure and the y-axis by the complementarity. And you can see, for example, a judge. A judge is an occupation that has both high exposed to AI and high complementarity. Why high exposure? Because it's a job that requires to assess a lot of information, go over cases, and AI can really speed up this process. It's also a job maybe a little repetitive. You know, you always see you need to have a different case, but you're even a specialist in certain types of cases. So in this case, using this framework, we can see that a judge is a case of a job that has a lot of exposure to AI because the tasks that this judge does can be performed by AI. However, because of the criticality or because the consequence of an error of a judge that is going to affect the potentially a human life, is a job that is unlikely to be fully substituted by AI. So it's a job that maybe a judge is going to be able to be more efficient and perform cases faster, which would lead to an increase in productivity. On the other hand, you can see a job that I think maybe it's quite important for India, which is telemarketing, which is a job as well that has a lot of exposure to the AI, but in some sense, because mistakes that you make are less critical, there is lower level of complementarity. So in this case, it's a job that we feel that there is more risk that to be displaced by the AI. So once we look on these occupations, we can classify jobs in three types of occupations. The occupations that are in blue, the occupations that have low exposure. So most of the tasks that you perform in your jobs are tasks that AI cannot perform yet. The ones in light orange are the ones that we call high exposure and low complementarity. So those are the jobs where you do many tasks that AI can do, and there is nothing, no force that is going to shield you from these technologies. So those that are jobs that are more at risk. And in the red is the jobs that we call high exposed and high complementarity. So these are the jobs that have a more likely to really benefit from this technology. So what we can see is that in the world in general, around the 40% of workers are exposed to AI. Almost half of them have the potential to benefit from the technology, while the other half is at risk. However, when we look across countries with different development levels, we see that the distribution of this job is quite unequal. That advanced economies have much more workers exposed to AI, but also more likely to benefit from this technology, while low-income countries have a much lower exposed to AI because it's still they are in the early stage of their development. There is a lot of workers in agriculture sector, which is already a low exposure occupation. So here you can already see one of the first warnings for us at the fund is that this technology can create divergency. So instead of countries being convergency, meaning that emerging markets economies start growing fast to catch up to advanced economies, it seems that advanced economies are better, have more workers to the potential to benefit to this technology. So now we look a little bit deeper to try to understand what is the source of these differences in exposure and complementarity across countries. So here we take the case of UK, which is a country that has high exposure and high complementarity, and they put here India. And we can see here I'm plotting the distribution of workers across 90 main group of occupations. And we can see that in UK, we have a large share of workers that are professional, managers, and clerical support workers, and as well services and say workers. And we can see that technicians workers. And we can see that this first four group of workers, they have a lot of potential to benefit from AI, particularly professional managers, but also high risk. However, when I look at India, we see that the employment share of these workers is still low. India still has a lot of workers in agriculture and elementary occupations that have low exposure to the technology. So really, this difference in the level of exposure and the potential to benefit is still coming from the structure of the economy and which type of occupations workers have. And what is interesting here is that when we look at as well the type of workers, for example, by gender, it's interesting that in most countries, and with exception of India, women, females, they're more exposed to the technology. They are more likely to benefit and they're more likely to be at risk. They're more likely to benefit because women in general, in particular in advanced economies, have higher levels of education. They are professional workers. So these occupations are likely to benefit. However, there are a lot of women working clerical workers, staffing, and these workers are at risk. India, you can see that the pattern is different, has more males exposure, and this is because the female labor force participation in India is still lagging when you compare to many emerging markets and developing economies. Now, if you, and at this point, I think everybody have read about AI. So the main thing that you know is that, the main difference between AI and previous waves of automation is that AI is more likely to affect more educated workers. As we can see in the sharing, we can see that for all countries, workers that have college or higher education, they are more exposed to AI, also have more potential to benefit. While if we plot the same picture for automation, for example, and look at the share of workers in routine occupations that are occupation more exposure to automation, you'd see a different picture where you'd see most of the exposure is still workers with a middle school of education. So this as well show that why AI is maybe a different technology than previous episodes of technology developments. Now we move here and we look at the distribution of these workers that are in the left in high exposed, low complementarity, which are workers that are at risk, and high exposed and high complementarity that are workers that are more likely to benefit. And a striking picture emerged. While the workers that are more at risk, they are more equally distributed across the income distribution, although in some countries, for example, as India or South Africa, it's slightly increasing. When we plot the workers that are more likely to benefit, we see that these workers, the employment then are more concentrated at the top of the income distribution, which means that the risk of AI may be equally distributed while the gains are concentrated at the top. So in the beginning, I talked about the potential of AI to increase inequality across countries, but also here we show that within countries we can face a similar picture, that AI can lead to increase of income inequality. Sorry. Okay. So now we move a little bit to try to understand, because to be transparent, this analysis is a very static analysis. We're looking where workers are, what they are working, but we know that jobs change, people move, new jobs are created. So instead, in order to try to at least grasp a little bit what are the potential of workers to move across jobs, for two countries, we use panel data, so we look at job transitions of workers, and we see how workers in general move from these occupations that are more at risk to these occupations that are more likely to benefit. This is not casual because this is historical data, so AI has not been adopted, but this just give an idea whether these transitions are frequent or not. And that we do for Brazil and again for the UK. And first, you see that on the bottom is the occupation where the workers start in the beginning of the period. And on the left, conditional whether the work transition of occupation is the occupation that work when he transitioned of occupation, he or she went. And you can see that in general, workers, they transition to occupations that are close to them. So they stay in the same group. But what we can see here that is interesting is that both in Brazil and the UK, but particularly in Brazil, we see that many workers are in these occupations that are at risk. They do change to the occupations that are likely to benefit. So these transitions are frequent in the data. So maybe this is a more nuanced picture, more optimist picture that show that it's not so hard to move from occupations that are risk and find an occupations that are close that are likely to benefit. And we also look at what happened to the wage of these workers when they move off the occupations. And we can see that these workers that move from occupations that are at risk to occupations that are more likely to benefit, these shifts are accompanied by wages premium, so the wages of then workers. But it's different. This is a historical perspective. It's true that in the short term, if there is a big shock and all workers start to move with occupations, these premiums can go down because of demand and supply forces. So now in the third part of our paper, we really try to address I think it's an important question, which is what is the impact of AI to productivity? And to do that, we are gonna, so there is a lot of work done at the micro level that look, for example, from firms, what happens if you have some workers that have access to AI and some workers that would not have access to AI. And the findings are that AI usually help workers. For example, they code more lines, or particular workers that are new at the firm, the ones that benefit most of the technology. However, these estimates don't give us an idea about what is the macro level implications of AI. To do that, we build a general equilibrium model, and this model is based on a paper by Benjamin Moll and Restrepo. and a paper in Econometrica 2022. And the paper, what it does is that incorporate four important channels to understand the impact of the technology in the economy. One is that it's implied it's labor displacement. So what we know is that if you have a task that was performed by a human, and suddenly there is automations or robots, and this task is start being performed by machines, usually firms they invest in machines because they are more efficient to produce the same task. And in general, this increase is close to 30% more efficient. So this is the first channel. What we understand is when we adopt AI, how much of labor displacement is going to happen, how much is going to increase the productivity. And then there is the complementarity channel, which increase the productivity of workers that are complementary to AI, less productivity gains. If we assume here that suppose that everybody in the economy actually benefit from this technology. So we calibrated the economy to the UK, and we estimate the impact of three different scenarios. One is that AI is not fully adopted, we call low AI complementarity. One that AI is fully adopted, it's a high AI complementarity, and the one that's fully adopted and we still have this boost in TFP. And we can see that in the three scenarios, we see a larger output gain. This is a comparison after 10 years. So 10% increase in output after 10 years, which is almost 1 percentage point increase in the growth rate of output every year during these 10 years. And you can see that in the more benevolent scenarios, 1.6%. And part of this increase you already see is driven by increase in total factor productivity, but a large chunk of it is by capital deepening. It's really the fact that firms are substituting labor by capital, which actually led to an increase as well of wealth inequality because the interest rates increase and people that hold a lot of capital becomes rich. So, and I just want to say that these estimates is in the middle range. For example, if you follow Semoglu, he thinks that is much lower than that. But if, for example, other economists, for example, Philippe Aguillon thinks that is highest. So there is a lot of uncertainty, but this is I think a model is always a more organized way of thinking about the potential impact. And last, we developed at the fund the AI Preparedness Index that look at four aspects of AI to be able to help our member countries. One in what we call foundational preparedness, which is digital infrastructure and human capital, because without that, it's very hard to be able to adopt this technology on the frontier. And the other one is what we call second generation of AI, second generation of preparedness, which is innovation regulation. And as you can expect, advanced economies are better prepared, while EMs in low-income countries still have a lot of work to do, particularly on the foundational preparedness. Now, if we look at India in particular, we see that India is comparable prepared, comparable exposed to other developing economies, emerging markets and developed economies. I'd say actually that the share of workers in high complementarity, high occupation, it's a little bit larger than other EMDs. However, there is a lot of gaps in preparedness, right? Particularly in digital infrastructure, human capital, the gap is lower, but as well innovation and economic integration. So those areas would help India to better prepare for this new wave of technology. And if you want, you can, we have developed an AI indicator. You can go there, compare your country and play with around. But so to conclude, AI, it's here and it's going to be a big shift. And I don't want to be just have this gloom presentation that is going to increase inequality across countries, within countries, because we have seen as well that there are many examples that, for example, in education or health, that AI may help us to really leapfrog and cutting other barriers that were not expected. But I think it's important for policymakers really start to preparing for this change and thinking about how to retraining, rescaling his workers, and they have the right infrastructure in place so everybody can benefit from this new way of technology. Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Marina. So our next speaker is Michal Fabinger. With Michal, everything comes in twos. There are institutions most of us can just hope to go for a tour. He's gotten ahead 2 PhDs from Stanford and Harvard in theoretical physics and economics. He's associated with two universities, the Colonia and Charles College in Prague, and the newly established Vedian University. And he also teaches two different things. He teaches machine learning courses and economics courses. So now Michal will come and tell us at least two more things.
Thanks very much for the introduction. Thanks for the invitation. Thanks for being here, everyone. And I should say that this particular quick talk will not be based on any particular academic paper. It will be my purely personal perspective, and other people may have completely different opinions, but I still hope maybe this perspective will be useful. In particular, I would like to say a little bit about the current state of AI, what were the recent developments, what are the limitations of AI systems at this moment, what kind of advances we can expect perhaps in the next year, 5 years, or maybe even longer. And I would like to provide a perspective on labor markets and economic growth and so on. Okay, so as for the current state of AI, I would say there were big advances in processing language, including computer code, and there were big advances in computer vision and image generation and similar systems. So first, let me say a couple of things about language processing or computer code processing. You probably know about these large language models that are actually very helpful as assistants. So at this moment, many of these LLM assistants are basically neural networks, specifically transformer neural networks that are trained to predict the next token in a large corpus of text. So you can download basically all of the data from the internet, and you can try to build a model that predicts the next word or the next subword unit, the next token. And once you have it, you can adjust it in a particular way, and you can turn it into a system that interacts with you as a helpful assistant like ChatGPT that you may be used to. So this adjustment, that would be fine-tuning. You may use also other techniques, or you can say you can fine-tune it using RLHF, reinforcement learning with human feedback. But once you have done this adjustment, you will have a system that can perform a particular task for you. Now, interestingly, if you have images or maybe even videos, you can use similar kind of networks, transformer neural networks, where you replace the individual subwords with pieces of images, and you turn it into tokens, and you can process it in a fairly similar fashion. So there's a lot of similarities between text processing and image processing. Now, you may have noticed that these large language models are not capable of doing everything. In particular, they lack basic common sense. Not completely, they have some understanding, they can use some logic, but that is kind of brute forced. They learned these basic skills by seeing enormous amounts of text. Now, this limitation in reasoning can be partially overcome by doing things sequentially. You can have multiple calls to a large language model. You can do processing little by little, and you may get better results. So this is on the language side. On the vision side, I would say computer vision is highly developed field. People have a lot of successes. You may have models that definitely have superhuman performance, and you may be aware of self-driving cars working quite well. They require still a lot of hand engineering, but you see that the perception that the computer vision models have is quite good. Besides understanding images and videos, you may want to generate some. And in recent years, there was a lot of progress, especially with diffusion models. So diffusion models, these are statistical models that are asked to reconstruct an original image if you provide a noisy version of that. If you do that in many stages, you can generate new images completely from scratch, maybe based on some text prompt. Now, these systems have limitations. They don't have a very good sense of geometry, especially 3D geometry. They may not have a good understanding of physics if you try to generate a video, but they're getting better and better. So this is some big progress that we have seen over the last couple of years. I don't really have pictures in my slides except for this one. So this is just an example where a company called Recursion Pharmaceuticals applied some of these models, specifically masked autoencoders, to understand cellular morphology. So you may have images of tissues, and you may want to have a neural network that understands what's going on in the biology of it. So here, the neural networks would be trained to reconstruct an entire photograph if you provide just these little pieces that you see on the left. And in the middle column, you see the reconstruction. In the right column, you see the actual original image. And these networks have some good understanding of cellular morphology. You can use it to understand whether a particular drug, whether a particular compound helps in alleviating some particular disease and so on. So this is just one application as an example. Now, as for the speed of progress, it's been a breakneck speed, I would say. But still, one could expect a little bit of a slowdown, maybe at this moment. I cannot be certain of it, but it's possible. Because the companies developing these models basically ran out of original human-generated data. And once you have trained your models on the entire internet, the next step is more difficult. Maybe you have to create some synthetic data to train your models to get better performance, and that's tricky. This is just more difficult. So possibly there could be some slowdown for some time. And I should also mention here that the open source community has been catching up with proprietary models. Besides proprietary models like by OpenAI or Anthropic, you would have models released by Meta AI, specifically these Llama models, and they are quite good. You can download the weights, you can run the model on your own computer. So yeah, here is just a big table from chatbot Arena. This is one way of measuring how good these individual models are. And if you look at the bottom, you would see the Llama models from Meta AI, and they would beat some versions of GPT-4. That means at least when it comes to the models that we know about, there is some catch-up going on in the open source community. Now it's possible that the proprietary companies that keep these models proprietary, they may have some more powerful models at this moment, and maybe they just use them internally, but this is what's accessible to the public at the moment. So I mentioned a couple of limitations. So one limitation is also hardware. GPUs at this moment are very expensive, and alternative processors for neural networks are also very expensive. There's basically a supply constraint. It's quite possible that this hardware constraint will be eased, and the training of the neural networks and inference is going to become substantially cheaper. If that happens, then you would have substantially cheaper multi-stage processing. You would be able to get substantially better performance from these large language models. Now, one thing that may happen is that the models, like the large language models or similar architectures, become much better at reasoning. So at this moment, I said they don't have much common sense. Maybe they will. In the future, it's plausible that even a fairly small model having maybe 1 billion parameters, could actually acquire common sense if it doesn't have to remember all of the information that these current models remember, right? So they are like encyclopedias in a sense. Maybe you don't need that. Maybe you can isolate this cognitive core and create a model that's fairly small, but can reason well and access information from outside. So if this happens, this would probably have huge implications for AI adoption. I wouldn't be surprised if this increased the GDP growth of the world by 10 percentage points or more. But of course, it's very hard to guess what's going to happen in the future. One thing that we learned is that AI progress is unpredictable. Maybe 8 years ago, people would expect much more progress in robotics and less progress in coding. It turned out that coding is an easier task than creating a robot that can manipulate items in a room and so on. All right, let me see. So let's say that these AI assistants become substantially more capable. They already are pretty good, but imagine that they also acquire better common sense. Then you could say that the labor market is going to look quite different. In the past, the managers at companies delegated simple tasks to their subordinates. But with AI assistants, it will be possible to delegate the task to AI agents. If anyone can use an AI agent, then effectively that person has a team working for them. So in a sense, everyone would become a manager. And if that happens, then a company of a given size can accomplish much more. A company of a given goal can just be much smaller than today. And what used to be done by startups may be done, feasible for an individual, and what today is done by a mid-sized company could become feasible for a startup. So I would say, is this working? I think the implications for the labor market could be huge, and workers will probably need to learn to be much more independent and think strategically. If you think about education systems, they definitely focused a lot on memorization or narrow skills in the past. In the future, they will probably have to develop much broader set of skills of the students or the course participants and so on. Otherwise, they would be more of a burden than help. Now, for developing countries, I would say this is a huge opportunity because if you think about it, if, say, these large language models are provided for free, then anyone with even a cheap computer and some internet connection can access that. It would be especially helpful for people who don't speak English, especially helpful for people who don't have much education. So a lot could be done in developing countries. And when it comes to entire industries, developed countries benefit a lot from having a lot of advanced companies, a lot of advanced institutions that help any particular participant in the market. This would be hard to replicate in developing countries, but if actually a single company can accomplish maybe an order of magnitude more than before, then maybe they don't need to be in some very advanced economy to function well. So I believe that developing country governments should really try to ease the legislation when it comes to creating new companies, creating startups, letting people who have the capability really provide the goods and services that otherwise would be heavily regulated. Okay, I hope I didn't skip a slide. Let me see. Now, kind of the sad news for labor markets is that some sectors of the economy could be completely automated or close to completely automated, and call centers are most likely an example of that. I think the call center industry could become close to 100% automated by AI in just a couple of years. If you think about startups, they have made a lot of progress. So for example, this startup called Superfocus AI can generate error-free responses in a narrow area of expertise. So this is not like ChatGPT that can give you inaccurate information sometimes. If you really focus just on one narrow area of expertise, you can achieve 100% accuracy in the responses. And a company called Teleperformance actually suffered from this a lot. Apparently, they were doing quite well for many years, and I assume they had capable management. But over the last few years, their stock price went down by 75%. I believe it's because investors have realized that this is a real thing that's happening. Now, let me see. Yeah, I was trying to think about future industries that don't exist yet. So if there are parts of the economy that completely disappear from the human labor market perspective, is it possible that something that just doesn't exist at this moment could show up? And for sure, in scientific fields, that's possible. I assume that, or I expect that there will be really fast progress in life sciences because AI is like really capable of understanding, say, protein structure and so on. So on the science side, there will probably be a lot of jobs. If you are a non-scientist and you worked in a call center, what else could you do? Well, I can imagine, for example, having entire new cities created in greenfield. Now, there exist startup cities that are being created at this moment, but it's quite rare. If people become way more capable than they are at this moment, maybe they can just go to a place where there's a lot of land, maybe some water supply, and perhaps that's all they need. They could build a new city. They could build a highly efficient highway system, not highway system, subway system that would transport people around. And once people get out of the subway station, there could be a cheap robotaxi waiting for them, and it could bring them to their home. So cities potentially could look completely or quite different from what they look now. Another future industry that I would like to see happen is health and fitness consulting. At this moment, people know very little. If they go to a medical doctor, the doctor just doesn't have hours to talk to a single individual. And for this reason, people have very poor understanding of how their own body functions, what's good for them, what's bad for them. They know little about nutrition, preventive medical tests, and the benefits of exercise. I can imagine that there could be an industry of health consultants who would go and talk to people, provide the right information. They would not need a standard medical degree. They could acquire the information from specially designed AI systems. The advice they provide could be checked by AI systems to make sure that they don't say anything wrong. But yeah, there could be a lot of person-to-person communication in the future that would be enormously beneficial for a lot of people. Okay, this is my last slide. So I would like to think a little bit about the very long run, what happens if a lot of things get automated. And I would like to argue that in the past, economic growth was basically a scalar. So there was just a magnitude that mattered the most. And in the future, economic growth is likely to be a vector where both the magnitude and direction matters. So if you think about different countries at this moment who have different levels of GDP per capita, and if you pick two that have the same level of GDP per capita, chances are that if you go there, people's lives look quite similar. Not identical, but quite similar. And that's because the GDP, the income that people had was used primarily to provide food, to provide shelter, to provide clothes, basically these basic necessities. In the future, if the world economy develops really, really well, and people have all of this, then the question is, what is the next thing that society wants to do or decides to do? And at that moment, I think people will disagree a lot. Some things that people are really excited about the prospect of something, may be perceived by others as really bad. And basically, individual countries or maybe the world as a whole will have to decide where to go with GDP growth and where not to go. And the long-run future is probably going to be determined not just by what technologies are developed, but to a large extent also by what technologies are just banned and not allowed at all because they would not match the values, the human values that people have. Okay, this is the end. So, thanks.
So I'll ask a few questions to begin with, and then I'll open it up to the audience. So Marina, I had one question about the presentation you made. It's very India specific. Towards the end, you said India is lacking in digital infrastructure to prepare for AI. I'm curious what you meant by that, because if we go by the previous session, India has one of the most advanced structures, digital structures in terms of both identity as well as communication. So what specifically did you have in mind, and how should India prepare for it?
Yes. So when we look at this, what we do is that we compare the infrastructure and we look at many sub-indicators across countries. And for example, one aspect is the cost of access to internet, and also how many people have access to internet. So that is all in that component of infrastructure. And the idea here is really to look at it, how many people are going to have access to ChatGPT or to the technology, and also the quality of the internet. And in the chart, if you see what we are comparing, is that we are comparing countries with respect to the frontier of emerging markets, developed economies, and also in advanced economies. And we see that in many emerging markets, development economies, for example, although there is a lot of countries that use cell phones, right, for financial transactions, for credit, as we discussed before, the cost of internet is still quite high, and people don't have good and quality internet at home and in rural areas. And we think that when we look, for example, at the health, we believe that AI, which was mentioned as well in the presentation before, it's an area where AI can really help because it can bring, for example, a nurse to improve their diagnosis, someone that have a much lower levels of education in a rural village, be able to, with the use of chat box, access and improve more people. So overall, infrastructure, it's not only in urban areas, but really more the inclusive aspect about how the entire population have access and cheap access to quality and the structure of the internet.
Yeah.
No, it looks good, high exposed and prepare compared to the EM bunch. But when, yeah.
So, okay, thanks. So there's a question for you, Michal, and again, this is very India specific. One of the fillps for the growth in Indian economy was the software industry. And one of the advantages that India had was there was a large population of people who could code and speak English. Now you're saying with AI, knowing English doesn't matter. Does that put India at a disadvantage, or the volume of uh, Indian people means that it doesn't really matter?
Yeah, so that's a really interesting question. It's interesting that people who don't speak English may not be used to acquiring information all the time as they should. So it may be that English speakers still will have an advantage because they may be more willing to seek information. But given that the chatbots can translate very well from language to language, I think this is a huge opportunity for those who don't speak English. So maybe India will keep some of the English language advantage. When it comes to software development, it really depends on what the current software developers do. So if they still want to write maybe some low-level code as they did in the past, it's not going to work because they will be outcompeted. But there's no reason why they couldn't acquire additional skills and maybe entrepreneurial skills, why they couldn't create new companies, new startups. So potentially, this could be a huge benefit. Basically, the AI systems would relieve them of the burden of writing some low-level code, and they could do something much more ambitious.
Yeah, I just want to, I think what is imposed to us is that we need to start thinking harder about what are the engines of growth, what is the engine of structure change. Because, for example, as we discussed in the first panel, right, we all in developing economies, we're hoping to look at the model of China. Now we know that going through manufacturing sector is extremely hard, extremely competitive. This China has taken all the space. Then we look at model of India. We look at the tradability of the service sector, and this was the new hope of structural change, right? We educate. We're going to be strong in tradability of the service sector. I think AI create a challenge for that model. And I think it creates, of course, risks or opportunities, but it's something that needs to be anticipated and should. And maybe we need to think harder again how we can make really countries accelerate and speed the structure change and use this technology to support the growth instead of destroying it.
Thank you. So, before AI, the big sort of technological revolution was the internet. And Paul Krugman is often mocked for his infamous statement that the impact of the internet is likely to be the same as of the fax machine. Do you think AI is fundamentally different? And do you think the impact is going to be 10%, you said, or is going to completely change the world? There'll be so much that we'll go in the vector and not in the scalar?
Yeah, I personally think that it is a fundamental change. It's something that will probably really transform every industry that exists. It will probably transform everything that we do in our everyday life. So I expect an impact much bigger than in the case of the internet. So I think it should also be more than a fax machine.
Yeah, no, I think one thing that is interesting is also when we think about ICTs, right? Well, there is this also famous quote from Soloy Like we see computers everywhere, but not in total factor productivity. But one thing we need to have in mind is that when this technology start, we all have access to use it. I think it's amazing how easily it is to use it, right? And but to have this impact in terms of total factor productivity is really about thinking about how firms change the way that they produce, is thinking about logistics. And we can see that this takes much more time to, and that in general there is some research that call about this J curve of productivity. So in the beginning, when firms are thinking about adopt these new technologies, they invest a lot. Investment is quite expensive and doesn't show. You are investing and you are not producing more, so actually total factor productivity start to going down. But when we were thinking about the ways of production, you were thinking about the value chain, is when this productivity must go up. So I think that maybe it's going to take a little bit of time, although the US stock market is quite excited about, but to change how how firms think about the logistics, we may see a decline before we start to see a rise in productivity.
Actually, it's sort of a cycle that's going through the venture capital industry. When ChatGPT came out, it was so easy to create a weekend demo, but when you try to translate it into production, people found it was not that easy. So the initial excitement has been tempered, and now people are sort of coming to grips with what it's actually capable of. Also, we do have techno optimists like Vinod Khosla, who's speaking of the world that you speak of, that AI would may transform society so completely that we'll have everything, and then you will have a UBI like system where we have to think what to do. So it's sort of they go back and forth between these two extremes.
Yeah, I think we can all agree that internet is also a big distraction, right? So that is yeah, a big part.
Now, there's also sort of we're talking about the labor markets, but there people also talk about the dangers of AI. People talk about AGI, when AI becomes more intelligent than humans, and they might take over the world. Do you think such kind of risks we should be thinking about in the economic world, or that's a sci-fi issue?
No, so I can say that at the fund, my work really focus on the 5, 10 years medium term. But as well as an institution, we make a very careful exercise that we look at all type of big risk of wars as well, pandemics, and also the excessive use of technology. So I think is something that we should be thinking about, and I think the EU, the Commission, has already trying to monitor more. Like if you have a big model, if a model goes, there are like 5 conditions need to be it goes to extra scrutiny. In the US, it's lower now in the Biden administration. If we're building a model that is too large, just to make the government aware. But I think institutions are going to catch up as well in the part of regulation.
Yeah, so I would say that there definitely is danger, and maybe the most immediate danger is in military technology. I think at some point it will be necessary to have international agreements that limit the technology, the military use, and yeah, that's what I would expect to happen first before models become better than humans in thinking.
So there was this legislation that was proposed in California. I don't know if you have followed it, SB 1047, which the California legislature was passed. It was about regulating large models, but then the governor Gavin Newsom vetoed it. And one of the arguments is, if we have open source models that are becoming better and better, how do you control that? You mentioned Llama. So if there's a rogue nation or a rogue entity who just takes Llama and keeps on improving it, how can you control it? Isn't it better to keep everything open so that
Yeah, I think from this perspective, it's not obvious whether it's better to keep things closed or open. Openness means more players that can compete with each other. Having closed systems maybe allow more supervision, but in general, it's very difficult. And I wouldn't want to be the policymaker who designs any kind of legislation to try to limit military uses of this technology. It's a tough job.
I think I'll open it up to the audience. So we'll start you in the dark jacket. Yeah.
Hi, I'm Mukur. I'm a computer science student at Columbia. So I'm particularly curious about your thoughts on the implications of AI in education. I mean, I've seen my 12-year-old cousin using ChatGPT for doing their assignments and uh, preparing for exams. Just you can just chat with ChatGPT to understand concepts, etc. So do you think that presents an opportunity, or would that pose a threat?
So let me answer that question from my perspective. I think it's a huge opportunity for those people who seek better knowledge, better education. But then there will be others who basically just want to have some kind of certification of official degrees. And both things are good. It's good to acquire knowledge. It's also good to be able to show to others that you have that knowledge. Um, just getting the information is much easier with AI systems only. To have people's skills certified, that's much more difficult, and that's where educational institutions definitely are still needed at the moment.
Hi, this is Novina. Thank you for your wonderful presentations. My question was workers who fall under high risk and low complementarity scenario, and also who the workers who fall under the sectors which will be completely automated. How do we lead this transition? What does the cost look like to move the workers from here to for them to have a quality of life? And what is the role of policymakers globally and also specifically to India? How does this transition happen?
Yes, so no, policymakers have a lot to do. First, is that since we're already projecting what are the sectors, what are workers that are going to be impacted, I think they need to adapt and rethink the education system, which go as well a little bit on the first questions, right? These chat box as well challenge professors and universities to rethink the way that they teach and to add value. And also policymakers, I think it's key to rethink about the retraining strategy. So what are the skills that are needed to the future, and help workers to make the transition to new jobs smoothly and easy as possible, because we know that the worst that can happen is scarce effect. So workers stay unemployed for a long time. There's loss of human capital. They get detached to the workforce, and mismatch where they end up not finding a job that is close enough to their skill. So I think if the government can reduce these two costs, it can make these transitions much more smooth. And we can see, for example, when in episodes of automation, when we compare the experience of workers in Germany versus the US, German workers that were displaced by robots, they perform much better, found new jobs, while in the US, the same displacement had much higher costs. So I think there are policies that can really smooth this transition.
Uday, then Ananta, and then Ruchir.
So I really have two questions, but I'll ask only one. Uh, you mentioned the problem of the current AI technology lacking common sense. Like LLMs keep hallucinating, or these images don't follow laws of physics, etc. So, is there a usable, practical definition or description of common sense that can be used to further train the AIs?
Yeah, thanks for the question. So I don't have any specific definition of common sense, but I can imagine that researchers could start with a large language model that acquired some common sense through having seen enormous amounts of text, and then try to distill the skills into a smaller neural network that does not remember everything, but has a little bit of reasoning capability. So I think that would be an interesting direction of research if from the common sense that ChatGPT already has, if you can extract or distill a smaller neural network that has the reasoning capability without remembering all of the information. Now, if this was successful, then potentially this could show researchers a particular direction in which they could go to enhance the reasoning capabilities of this kind of a reasoning only model. But of course, I'm speculating here.
I have a question to Dr. Fabinger. In the last slide, you mentioned about future will be determined by technologies that could be embraced or that could be banned. What kind of metric we need to construct and what parameters would be there in that metric to decide which of those will need to be embraced and which need to be banned? And a question for Dr. Tavares. I really appreciated that paper, AI and the Future of Work. And one of the things in the paper was that capital may need to be taxed differently and more to compensate labor, was mentioned in that paper. But will there be unintended consequences of doing that? And is there other ways of making the capital or capitalist see the social consequences of their embrace of AI with respect to labor displacement? Are there other ways of doing that?
Yeah, thanks for the question. I hope that the future direction of GDP growth and technological growth will be determined in some fairly democratic way within countries, hopefully globally. Because personally, I don't really have an opinion on which technology should be pursued, which technology should be banned. Uh, in the case of gene editing, for example, we can change the genes in patients' liver to cure diseases at this very moment, or well, at least there are drugs that are being experimented with that do this. And gene editing for sure is a very controversial topic. For medical purposes, most people will say that this is good. For the purpose of enhancing people's capabilities, physical capabilities, intelligence, and so on, I think most of the population of the world would say this is not good. And in the case of AI technologies, the discussion is probably going to be similar. It's not obvious to me if it's good for people to watch the most liked video on TikTok or YouTube, or if that they should be prevented from spending 6 hours per day watching these videos. That's already a question that arises at this very moment. And as AI becomes better and better, there will be more and more things that will be super addictive. And then the question is, what do we want people to actually do in their life? And I think it's a hard question. And I hope there will be some democratic process worldwide that at least can guide the policymakers.
Yeah, on the tax. Yeah, so the model show, the simulation showed that there is this high return from capital from AI, and and which raised the question, right? How to make this technology transition more inclusive. And we know over time that in general there is also a decline of the capital income tax. So we also in the fund have and support the minimum capital income tax across countries. And so one way is the simple way is just increase the capital income tax. But we know that many times the political will to certain reforms are very difficult. So another aspect is to subsidize some wage, subsidize workers. There is also a movement of, we focus a lot on cash transfers or UBI, but many people start to discuss the right to work, which meaning that even if your wage, even if your work is not, the marginal product of labor is quite low, people should have the right to have a job. So these are other solutions that could be on, but any of those, it raised the question, the government could subsidize some R&D in certain occupations, in certain areas that raise, but all the solutions that I'm giving to you ask the question. So if we're spending more, we should collect more. So if we're not raising the capital income tax, should we make labor income tax more progressive? uh, these resources need to come from somewhere. So there are cost of benefits.
Yeah, one question here, and then Richard, you get the last question, and then you get to close the conference. But yeah.
A question for Dr. Tavares here. It seemed to me, I haven't read the paper, I apologize, but your presentation was, and by the way, for both of you, I used to run one of these big IT services businesses, and you've convinced me that the fact that I'm not doing it is probably a good thing right now. But my question was, it seemed like the implication in the work you did was that AI technology is, you held it constant in terms of progress and looked at the impact of today's technology on economies and jobs. How do you factor in, and is there a thinking around factoring in the fact that this technology will evolve in the medium term, and how does that impact the conclusions that you reach?
Yeah, this is, I think, it's a fundamental question because in some way my exercise is quite simple. What I do is that we assume that there is a technology, adopt the technology, and there is a steady state comparison. But the quick question in what we have seen, for particular in, for example, we have another Nobel Prize, AI Nobel Prize on the protein. So that in certain areas of research, what AI is doing is really accelerate innovation, right? And that it maybe create a new path that is not only one adoption, but we're going to have an increase in total factor productivity and increase innovation that could be much larger. And I think that's possible, particularly in health, in chemistry, where what AI does is that look at thousands of studies and really shrink the space where you need to go to the lab and really test. So it's really speed up the process of new discovery. Then, of course, this could lead to even large increases in total factor productivity, but we in this sense we are very modest because also our work really is focused on medium term horizon, and that what we're discussing is much long term horizon. But I'm an optimist that KI may bring important discoveries. It's going to really improve our lives, particularly in health and fighting diseases in many areas.
Actually, can I come back to some of the previous questions about education and reskilling? I think one thing that the governments around the world could do quite easily is to lower the cost of companies that provide new training for workers who were laid off from industries that were perhaps affected by AI. In particular, the governments typically pay for elementary school buildings and high school buildings. They could just let the buildings be used on the weekend by companies that provide some reskilling opportunities for workers who either were laid off or potentially could be laid off. It could substantially lower the cost of reskilling.
I wanted to use this opportunity to tell a comment/story and a question. So the story behind how this panel came about. We have two Nobel Prizes in AI, and the one Nobel Prize in economics. That person also studies AI. So, in a way, a challenge for us as economists is how can we take into consideration and contribute to that big structural change that's happening. And I believe that our tribe, the economists, always have a lot to offer, and we didn't know we could have this substantive conversation. But I'm so pleased to see this wonderful conversation, and you couldn't have it with any better people. Our moderator sent me a paper. He's a computer scientist, but he sent me a paper a few hours ago on uh, on tariffs and who pays the tariffs. So he's a he's also a secret economist, and Marina's work, I found it incredibly interesting. As Ananta's question raises, you open questions of distribution, you open questions of taxation, and I think it's very important for us, not just in the US, but from the India and emerging markets, as you've emphasized, to be part of that conversation and shape the dialogue. And Michal, I really I joke that I've retired, and the thing that I look for every morning is freedom of imagination. And you really pushed my imagination. I love like thinking, every time here at this same stage, we talk about labor restrictions in India that prevents firms to grow big, and your push to us to think about how five firms with 63% of Indians today work in a firm at as which is 5 people or less, but you open our possibility of what could be done. Maybe not in 5 years or 10 years, but there is a possibility of these one-person billionaire firms, billion-dollar firms, and I think that, and also for the cities. So the question, I'll go into the question, and I want to go back to the Iron Age. Around 1000 BC or so, when iron and steel technology started to spread, the number of deaths around the world started going up a lot. So you can see this in grave sites, that a lot of skeletons are found with damage, damage with axes in the head. And so this is uh, around 1000 BC. And around 500 BC, we see the rise, the Axial Age. The Buddhism, Hinduism, the Torah, Zoroastrian texts are all coming and are all talking. Mahabharata is talking about a fight, the just war. There's the Torah, the God is angry as well, and this in many ways is a technology to control the technological advance that the Iron Age brought. And so the question is, do you think, and we see this, by the way, in the war in Gaza now, the use of AI, for example, in identifying and targeting using drone technology. So do you think we are actually quite close to that world of the vector growth where we must be thinking very seriously about banning technologies? Does India also have to contribute with new religion and new ethics on controlling the power of AI?
So let me respond. I think at this very moment, humanity should be thinking about how to develop some system that in the future would allow it to communicate and decide on what to ban, what not to ban. At this moment, the world is decentralized. Every country does whatever it wants to some extent. And that's not good from the point of view of the long run military capabilities. So at least people should start thinking about how to do this. And I'm hoping that 1 billion Indians contribute to the discussion, that people start thinking about what it is that we actually want in the future.
I feel that is, of course, that all new everything that we do can always cause good and bad, right? I think banning is always such a strong word for technology that even we saw new Nobel prizes can bring you such a good things. What we need is it's collaboration, right? It's countries to speak, is to have a system to have regulations, to have monitoring, and if it's certain technologies can cause a risk, certain types of use be banned. But I think it needs to be done in collaborations, no single use, because I think the benefits are real. So
There are some things that give me hope, and one of them is Japan. So in the past, Japan was able to ban guns for at least a century. So I think there's a positive example.
Do you want me to? So first, that set of campus, now we call the Nobel Prizes the Turing Award in chemistry, physics, and economics. But in terms of banning, I think banning is going to be very difficult. The state of the art language model from 5 years ago, just 5 years ago, GPT-2, which preceded GPT-3, now you can train that for $20. So if you ban something now, technology and these architectures will keep evolving. And, the phrase is terrible, but the only person who can stop a bad guy with a gun is a good guy with a gun. So I think we have to keep progressing, and we will develop systems to, balance against whatever evil people might try to do with AI. So banning is not the solution. I think progress is the solution.
If I can also say something more, another thing that should be banned is privacy violating AI. And it may be tough, but in the future, I can imagine that AI could very easily spy on you, what you say in your home. And that's something to think about as well.
Much for being here all day. Mr. Deepak, also to thank him for his support and being here, moral support as well. Thank all the participants. I wanted to especially thank Mona. Basically, without her, none of this would have happened. So I also wanted to thank volunteers. Where are the volunteers? Yeah, so maybe we can thank them when we go for drinks. But they really one of the things that I've learned is there is a family at the Rod Center. We're repeat panelists with new topics and new panelists, and I just want to appreciate that we can keep this conversation going. I'm so happy that we had this very substantive dialogue. So thank you so much, everybody.